In 2017, US-led coalition aircraft dropped over 39,000 bombs and missiles on Syria and Iraq alone. That's a single-year expenditure against insurgents. Are smart bombs being used too much? If a new total war with a peer opponent broke out tomorrow, would the US have enough smart bombs left in its inventory? 2017 wasn't an outlier. The number of bombs the US used over the last 20 years is staggering. Here are just some of the news headlines. 1999, US running out of bombs. 2011, NATO running short of precision weapons. 2015, US running out of bombs to drop on ISIS. 2018, US running out of bombs. So if a big world war would come, where the US Air Forces would be working 24/7 for months, if not years, just when would the stockpiles run out? This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream, a streaming service that features thousands of documentaries. Whether you like history, nature, science, technology or other topics, you will probably find a captivating show. Nazi secret weapons documentary, for example, talks about the first guided bombs. CuriosityStream offers 35 collections of curated programs handpicked by experts, including award-winning exclusives. And Binko viewers, heads up, if you click the link below and use the code BINKOV, you can sign up for a whole year for just $14.99. Curious about it? Try it out! In 1995, there was a detailed report on US Air Force weapons stockpiles by the Government Accountability Office. Those were simpler times, when smart bomb usage was not as prevalent. Fewer than 80,000 smart bombs were in US inventory. Before 1972, the US used guided bombs very sparingly. They were still very much a novel weapon class. A few years prior, the first cheap, reliable and mass-produced guided bomb started to get procured, the Paveway laser-guided bomb. From February 1972 to February 1973, the US used 10,500 laser-guided bombs in Vietnam. Half of the bombs hit their target, which was good for the time, but major US operations in Vietnam ended. It was not until 1991 that the US used guided bombs on a major scale once again. During the 37-day-long Gulf War air campaign, the US and its allies used up over 200,000 bombs and missiles. Some more operations in the Middle East and over Bosnia were performed in the 1990s, but without major expenditure of guided bombs. That is until 1999 and the bombing campaign over Yugoslavia. The US and its allies used up over 20,000 air munitions during the 78-day-long campaign. Afghanistan operations last to this day. In 20 years, the US and its allies used up 100,000 bombs and missiles there. By 2020, smart bomb usage dwarfed any of the Gulf Wars. Back in 2003, the US dropped most of the 27,000 bombs used in Iraq over the course of the 42-day-long campaign. The US participated little in Libya in 2011. The US allies fired most of the almost 8,000 weapons during the 230-day-long campaign. Syria and part of Iraq saw further action from 2014 onward. The US went all in there, bombing ISIL. Together with its allies, it used over 120,000 bombs or missiles. The US DoD claims some 80% of airstrikes came from the US. Given the counterinsurgency nature of the campaign and ample drone and attack helicopter usage, it's very likely a sizable part of those numbers are various Hellfire missiles. From 2004 to 2018, the US Air Force procured 5,200 Hellfires to be fired from their UAVs. As those drones were in high demand, it's likely most of those missiles were used up. The overall anti-ISIL campaign bomb usage was simply staggering. JDAM usage over the decades is well documented. 222,000 were procured and 90,500 were spent by the US from 1998 to 2014. Overall bomb usage over time, including other types, does include uncertainties. The US to Allied bomb usage, ratio of bombs to missiles, and weapons used in exercises. Those are all estimated. Now, that is a mighty big total in the end. 235 to 320,000 smart bombs. Evidently, the US has been producing more this whole time. Some might say the US could just ramp up its production like it did in World War II and produce 1 million bombs if needed. It could, sure, but such production ramp-ups take years. In World War II, it took the US almost 5 years to raise its aircraft production by 42 times. The US may not have years if a new world war breaks out. So what does the US have today? It uses several guided bomb types. The Paveway series, which kicked off the mass usage back in the Vietnam War. Today they are also GPS guided as well. The JDAM series started off as GPS guided, but later variants had the laser guidance added to some. The JSO is a glide bomb. The first variant had GPS guidance only, a later one added infrared imaging guidance. SDB, or small diameter bomb, is a small formed glide bomb with GPS guidance. Stormbreaker is also small form, but with an advanced tri-mode seeker. Paveway series has had many different bomb types from different manufacturers produced over the decades. By 2015, some 500,000 Paveways had been delivered by all manufacturers combined. In the case of JDAM bomb kits, precise records exist. 394,000 were ordered by the US. An additional 45,000 were foreign sales. Using a similar ratio for the Paveway bomb family, some 500,000 Paveways might have been delivered to the US altogether to this day. Adding the rest of the US smart bomb arsenal is more clear-cut, as those are newer weapons which are more easily tracked in DoD procurement reports. The Joint Standoff Weapon is a relatively low production item, with some 5,900 bombs made so far for the DoD. Small Diameter Bomb 2, now known as Stormbreaker, is still very new. By 2019, some 2,600 have been contracted. That leaves the Small Diameter Bomb 1, or GBU-39, which has seen steady but small production figures since its inception. Overall, the US has thus likely procured a little over 925,000 guided bombs over the decades. During the same time, it expended between 235 and 320,000 bombs. The list shown does not mention some older type bombs. Thus the final tally stands. The US Armed Forces today likely have in their inventories between 600,000 and 690,000 guided bombs. Important to note that count does not include cruise missiles or tactical missiles like Maverick, Hellfires or HARMs. Just the Hellfire orders so far were pretty huge. So was the US running out of bombs as the media had suggested? Taken out of context, yes. In certain months, the US was expending more bombs than it was slated to procure in that month. But then new contracts were signed to compensate for said bomb expenditures. In recent years, the US has strived to keep the overall inventory quite steady. So what does that figure of roughly 640,000 guided bombs in the US inventory tell us? How long would such an inventory last if the US suddenly went to war? A total war against Russia or China, something global where its total aircraft inventory would have to be used 24/7. Here are some historical examples, like the Gulf War. For ground strike and suppression of air defense missions, 0.52 sorties were made for every combat plane present. The 2003 air campaign in Iraq offered similar sortie rates. Ground strike sortie rate was just 0.47 for every combat plane. In a total war against a peer opponent, more combat planes would do air combat missions than in the Iraq War, as the air interception threat would be much greater. Also, more strike missions might be cancelled without weapons released due to various threats. Even over Afghanistan and Syria, strike missions with actual bomb releases compared to nominally tallied strike missions amounted to some 60% of the latter. Back in 1991 in Iraq, planes sometimes carried a dozen bombs in action. Since they were mostly unguided, using many smaller bombs per target was preferred to achieve a hit. By 2003, that changed. Smart bombs were predominantly used, which back then meant larger bombs, so planes carried fewer of them on missions. Today, an F-16 can be expected to carry two 2,000-pound bombs, or 4,000-pound ones. Super Hornets may carry 50 to 100% more. Strike Eagles may be expected to double even that. F-35s would likely want to remain stealthy and carry 2 bombs per mission. Unless we're talking about small diameter bombs, in which case all the planes mentioned so far would carry more of those. Against China or Russia, longer distances would have to be crossed, so drop tanks would take up space instead of additional bombs. But small diameter bombs are a fairly insignificant part of the US bomb arsenal. The vast majority of missions would be flown with 2 to 6 bombs per plane. We will assume the first several months would have to have half of the combat sorties flown for air combat, and then later on have 60% of the combat sorties flown for strike missions. If one manages to have the entire fleet of 3,300 US combat planes fly at 0.7 sorties per day, then strike weapons usage might be roughly 1,600 weapons per day. As the war goes on, overall fleet availability would keep dropping, lowering the number of weapons used per day. On top of smart bombs, other weapons would also be used, like tactical missiles, cluster munitions, anti-radar missiles and various cruise missiles. Especially in the first few months of the war. Those would eat up into that 1,600 weapons per day figure. For argument's sake, if the US would miraculously suffer no aircraft losses, half a year of such a war might see the US spend somewhat over 330,000 smart bombs, on top of other air-to-ground weapons. And the US would definitely be losing planes in such a war. Even if it somehow lost just 500 combat planes in the first half year, with added long-term maintenance issues, another 300,000 bombs might be realistically used in the second half of the first year. B-52 and B-1 bombers would not be able to fly over targets and drop bombs, as Russian and Chinese air defenses would make bomber runs too risky. Only B-2s might regularly survive such runs, but their available numbers are small. If the B-2 fleet somehow manages to do 5 sorties per day and keeps it up for a whole year, it could drop some 90,000 bombs in a year. Overall, roughly 600,000 smart bombs might be used in the first year of the war, if the US losses remain implausibly low at just 500 planes. So in reality, the US would not run out of today's smart bomb stocks until sometime around 14 or 15 months into a total war. That's because some new bombs would be made as well in the meantime. Current smart bombs ordered for the US is at some 70,000 for the year 2020. Today, in peacetime, JDAM production takes roughly 2 years from contract to delivery. While fast ramp-up of production would definitely happen in a total world war, that would still take time. So it's very likely there would be a moment where smart bombs would run out, impacting mission planning. But that would not likely happen before the 15-month point into the war. The planes would then be low on smart munitions for several months, even with a wartime ramp-up of bomb production, dropping maybe 10,000 smart bombs per month, while the operational need would be some 4 times that figure. But gradually, due to aircraft losses and ever-growing wartime bomb production, smart bombs would once again become the norm for strike missions, possibly by the start of the 3rd year into the war. So the verdict is no, the US would not run out of smart bombs anytime soon, but in a world war it might run into some issues in the very long run, before production capacities manage to expand. But let's hope there won't be new wars where these bombs would get used. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.